All right. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome to Friday, officially. Got the whole weekend ahead of us. Big plans?
Not quite well.
No?
Not
Uh,
really.
Is the sort of student activities, is there anything going on? Is there Linda doing anything?
I guess it's study group removal workshop.
Oh, okay.
15 p.m.
That sounds very informative, but not very fun.
Yeah.
Probably not supposed to be fun, though. Yeah, I don't know, the weather seems to have cooled down quite a bit, so I don't know if it's going to be, nice on the weekend or not.
It's gloomy.
It's what?
It's gloomy.
It is just a little bit, yeah,
Yeah.
just a little bit. But I don't know, after the heat wave, I think I'm just happy to
Yeah.
have some cool air floating around,
Me too. That was such a disastrous
Ugh.
experience.
That was the worst.
Yeah.
We've got to fix this global warming thing. I can't have it get any warmer.
It actually feels really cold after the heat wave.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. The couple days after, I think it was 24 or 26, and yeah, that felt cold, even though normally
Yeah.
that feels hot. I don't know how people. Does it get hot in Bangladesh?
Yeah, in Bangladesh it's like 30 degrees and 28 degrees in usual days.
Okay.
But the people there, they are used to in this temperature, so
Right.
they don't feel that hot. But in usual summer days, the temperature might shoot up to 36 degrees or
Right.
28 degrees. At that time, people feel really hot.
Yeah.
And it's really humid. The
Right.
weather is really humid. The humidity is really high.
Right.
So they don't feel the direct heat wave, but it gets hot. The air gets damp and
Yeah.
hot.
Yeah. What's the presence of air conditioning? Is there lots of it around or none of it?
Yeah, quiet. Everyone has air conditioning in their houses.
Oh, good.
Different rooms. So yeah.
You kind of need it, hey?
Mhm.
You kind of need the air conditioning, hey?
Yeah, we all need the air conditioning there.
Yeah.
But during winter times, it doesn't. It's like it doesn't even get the normal temperature of Canada. It's 15 degrees. The
That's-
lowest was 8 degrees maybe.
That's because
in the history of Bangladesh.
That's because the temperature of Canada is abnormal.
Yeah.
It is freezing here. I've actually been, the last time I was in Edmonton, I was there for Christmas visiting my parents, and it actually went to minus 40.
Oh my god.
Yeah,
That's really cold.
it's very cold.
How does it feel in minus 40?
It hurts. Like you go outside and it just like
Oh,
hurts
shit.
to be outside. Yeah, it was really cold. It was really cold. Hopefully it'll never be like that here. This is
Yeah, hopefully.
this is like the perfect climate. It's not too hot, it's not too cold,
It's not too cold, right?
as long as it stays that way. Okay. So Hamad is here. Good morning, Hamad. Sean is here. Good morning, Sean. Basil's here. Good morning to you, sir. Basil is also here. Good morning, Basil. Elizabeth is here. Good morning, Elizabeth. Jesse's here. Good morning, Jesse. And Hassan is here. Good morning, Hassan. And Reza's here. Good morning, Reza. All right. So, yesterday we were talking about Canada's Indigenous people, right? And how,
Yesterday's class.
and what?
I missed yesterday.
That's true, you did. Good morning. That's true, you did.
I couldn't come.
You can watch it on the weekend,
Uh,
seeing as you have no plans.
Yeah. That's my plan.
Yeah, there you go. There's a plan for you. That'll be fun. So we were talking about Canada's Indigenous people, and we were kind of trying to explain a little bit of their history and experience, but also how racism has played a role in the construction of Canada, right? So even though we think of Canada as a very multicultural, very accepting, very tolerant country, and again, in some ways that's true. In other ways, that's not entirely true, and it hasn't been true in the past, um, for sure. And if you look back to the history of Canada, you will see racism not only directed at Indigenous people, but you'll also see it directed at Chinese immigrants, at Japanese immigrants, at South Asian immigrants, and so, I don't mean to ignore the experiences of those people, but we just can't deal with everything, and so, you know, there are other stories to be told here, and Indigenous people are not the only people who suffered racism and discrimination in the building of Canada. But maybe we'll have some time to deal with that next week. I'll see what we can squeeze in. What's that? Oh,
No,
okay.
I was just agreeing with you.
Okay, good. I like that. So we said that so Indigenous people were kind of pushed aside, right? And they were pushed aside because of the increasing numbers of Europeans coming here, because of disease, because of technological differences, and because of the Canadian government's will to kind of create a white Christian Canada, right? That's really what they were looking for. And unfortunately, these people were kind of inconveniently in the way of that, right? And so they needed to be moved aside, right? They needed to be somehow disappeared, right? And so the government embarked on a number of projects, right? The shooting of the buffalo, the treaties that sort of confined these people to reservations, and attempts like the residential schools to assimilate them, right? To sort of blend them into Canada so that there wouldn't actually be European Canadians and Indians, there would just be Canadians, right? But of course, we know that didn't work, and the process of trying to do that was incredibly brutal and traumatic for generations of Indigenous people, right? And residential schools were kind of at the forefront of that attempt to assimilate Indigenous people, right? And so some people have argued that we should think of this as a genocide, right? And I said when most people think of genocides, they think of the Holocaust or they think of Rwanda, and those are genocides in which large numbers of people are killed in kind of a short period of time. But this is kind of a different sort of genocide, right? This is one that happens very slowly over 100 or 150 years. It happens in a bunch of different ways, but it's pretty clear. Sorry, I'm just going to jump ahead here. It's pretty. Oh, I actually don't have that slide anymore. It's pretty clear that that the Canadian government was intentional, right? They were trying to somehow make these people go away, right? Because they were in the way of creating this country that that the founding fathers of Canada wanted to create, right? And so I just reminded you yesterday of the article, pardon me, the article we read a few weeks ago on the ongoing legacies of Canadian genocide, right? And so the author, good morning, the author said that indeed we should think of this as a genocide, right? That the UN defines genocide in a certain way, and Canada has done all of those things, right? And so we said at the time when we read that article, we said, well, people might reject that argument, right? They might say, no, this isn't a genocide. Genocide's a very powerful word, right? It's a very heavy word, and for most Canadians, they probably don't like to think of themselves as living in a country that perpetrated a genocide against others, right? Genocide, for a lot of Canadians, genocide is something that happens over there, right? It happens, in other countries, right? In the developing world. Genocide is not something that is supposed to happen here, right? And so some Canadians might struggle to to think about it in this way. And again, you can, as a European Canadian or as a white Canadian, part of your privilege is being able to ignore this whole thing, right? Because again, the racism and prejudice isn't directed at you, and so you're able to ignore it, right? But for lots of the people that we heard from in the video yesterday, it's not so easy, right? It's not so easy when your parents or relatives have gone to Indian residential schools, right? It's not so easy when you know you I think the artist Steve Sanderson there, the guy, the comic book artist guy, he was saying, like, yeah, like people tell you you're stupid all your life, and even if they don't say anything, you can feel them looking at you, right? You can feel them kind of judging you, right? And again, you don't really get to ignore that as an Indigenous person, right? As a white person, you can, because it's not focused at you, right? And so, if we kind of think about it in this way, we said this at the time, then you can take steps to solve it, right? If you kind of admit what has happened, if you accept history as it is, then you can kind of move forward, right? And you can attempt to repair the relationship, right? But again, if you don't kind of accept what's happened, then you can't fix anything, right? Think of a relationship between you and a boyfriend or girlfriend, or you and a friend, or you and a parent. If nobody is going to admit that they're wrong, you can't fix it, right? There's no way to mend the relationship unless one party or both parties says, hey, look, I screwed up, let's fix it, right? And so it's the same thing here. If one party, especially the more powerful party, if that party doesn't admit to have done anything wrong, then nothing happens, right? Nothing will change, nothing will be fixed, right? And so let me just jump ahead here. We were talking about the legacy of this history between Canadian government and Canadians and Indigenous people. And we said that if you look at statistics, and I won't go through them all again, you'll see that Indigenous people, on average, have kind of fallen behind in Canadian society, right? They don't live as long. Their health outcomes are worse. Their educational outcomes are worse. Their the amount of money they make is less than the average Canadian, and so lots of Indigenous people are disadvantaged and suffering. But also keep in mind that some of the people we're talking to in this video are also trying to say, look, there's lots of different experiences, right? I don't see myself in those statistics. We'll hear from a woman she said that at the very beginning of the video yesterday. We heard yesterday from Renee Pelletier, she's a lawyer, right? She's done quite well for herself, right? And so she's not really kind of part of these statistics in that way, right? We were talking to, what's his name? His last name is Alfred. He's a historian and a writer, right? Kent Monkman is a successful artist, right? And so, again, we don't want to think of every Aboriginal person in the same way, right? There's lots of different experiences. Some people have been able to do quite well for themselves. Some people are really struggling, right? But they struggle at a disproportionate rate to other people in Canada, right? And again, there's white people struggling. There's white people doing really well. There's Asian people struggling. There's Asian people doing really well. I mean, it's all across the board, right? But again, they suffer these outcomes at a higher rate than you might think, right? And so, again, you can see there, according to the Human Development Index, yeah, these people are living in a different country, right? According to their health and their education and their sort of incomes, they're almost living somewhere else, right? And so, again, I won't go through all of these again. Indigenous people are overrepresented in prison to a huge degree, right? Again, it's a problem, right? We've got to look into that and ask, why is it, right? Why are we seeing this pattern? Okay, so I've got lots of data here. We've looked through all of it. I'm going to skip ahead because we were talking about what do we do, right? How do we start to sort of mend this relationship? And so started watching this documentary yesterday, Eighth Fire, and I asked you some questions, right? And we got, I guess, about maybe a little more than halfway through, um, but we heard some of the stereotypes that exist around Indigenous people, right? They're lazy, they're drug addicts, they're alcoholics, they're uneducated, they're, they don't want to work, they just want everything for free, they don't pay any taxes, all of these kind of super negative stereotypes, right? And again, there's, like many stereotypes, there's a little grain of truth to that, right? You will find Indigenous people with substance abuse problems, right? With drug and alcohol problems. But more often, people are, people have addictions not because they're bad people, it's because they've been hurt, right? They've been traumatized, and the alcohol or the drugs helps to kind of soothe that hurt, right? But of course, as we all know, drugs are very addictive and damaging, and they're difficult to control, right? And so, when you try to kind of soothe yourself and make your emotional pain feel better, it's very easy for the drug to take over, right? And the next thing you know, it's kind of running your life, right? But yeah, because of that trauma, because of residential schools and discrimination and prejudice, there is a lot of hurt, there's a lot of pain, right? And some people are trying to sort of numb that pain a little bit through drug and alcohol abuse, right? And so, yeah, you will find there are Indigenous people that have addictions, right? Why do we say that a disproportionate number of First Nations kids are not finishing school? Why do we say that?
They're mostly joining gangs.
Not mostly, but sometimes, yeah. Yeah.
And then joining gangs and gang against
Yeah, right. School and family are places of belonging, right? That's groups of people that you can feel, you can feel a part of, you can feel protected by, right? You can feel cared for. And again, if, kids grow up in a home where, again, maybe their parents have been traumatized by residential schools, maybe they don't feel a lot of love or connection or inclusion there, right? And then they go to school all day and they suffer from discrimination and racism, right? Sometimes from students, sometimes from teachers, unfortunately, right? And so where are you going to go, right? Where are you going to go to feel like you're part of a community, right? Where can you find people that will look after you and support you, right? And protect you? And gangs fill that need, right? And so people join gangs for all kinds of reasons, but that is one reason. They want to feel part of something, right? They want to feel like they have a group of people around them who care and will protect them, right? And again, gangs can be very good at that, right? They can be very good at taking care of their own, right? And protecting each other. And so, yeah, it's true. A lot of kids don't feel included, right? They don't feel part of what's going on. And part of that reason might have to do with the answer to number 3. What did we say that Canada was founded on?
She said it's like somebody coming into the house and telling you what to do. So,
Yeah, they have to. She said that Canada was stolen, right? She says that this belonged to Indigenous people and the land was stolen. And how do you justify that theft, right? How do you make it okay to take something from someone else, right? Oh well, what's that?
you have a reason.
Yeah, you have to find a reason, right? They're not good people, right? Or they weren't using it properly, right? Or so you find a reason, right? And so Lee says, yeah, this country was founded on negation, right? A negation of Indigenous people. White Europeans made them less so that they could justify, good morning, they could justify taking things from them, right? And all of those kind of stereotypes and prejudice that we heard about and that still exists, they just serve to kind of keep things the way they are, right? We can continue to not feel bad about what's happened in the past if we feel that, oh well, you know, it's indigenous people's fault, right? Why are they all drug addicts? Well, there must be something wrong with them, right? There must be, you know, they must be like that in some way. And that's that kind of, that's one of those ideas that race-based societies believe, right? That races have certain characters, right? And so indigenous people are lazy, right? And again, no race of people is lazy, and there are really no races anyway, right? And so, but those prejudices seek to or work to keep that inequality in place, right? We don't have to feel bad about what's happened to indigenous people or what's happening to them now if we think that they are less than us, if we think that it's their fault, right? If we think that, well, you know, if they were just a little bit stronger, then they wouldn't, you know, drink so much, right? Have some discipline, right? But again, if we ascribe what's happening to indigenous people directly to them, then yeah, it's easy not to feel bad, right? But if we say that what's happening to them is the result of hundreds of years of colonial domination and discrimination, then yeah, I mean that's different, right? Did anyone look at Kent Monkman's art? Did anyone Google it? Pull out your phone and Google it now. I'm not going to put it on the screen. Good morning. But just Google Kent Monkman, and you'll see Kent Monkman images. So you'll see lots of artwork from him, very colorful, and usually what it is kind of depicting the history of indigenous people in Canada, but in a very kind of strange way, right? Which one are you looking at?
It's this one for
What's happening in it?
white man is laying down and there's a two houses there, and the others are frightened in the suits, and it's like one indigenous person is doing some ritual, I don't know, and the rest are watching.
Do you see what? Can you see what that piece of artwork is called? Does it have its name?
Oh, I think he involved the communist movement.
Oh, that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's, oh yeah, here it is. The one he issued, oh yeah, okay, I see it. That one's great. That one is great because, so, what's it called? Hang on. Oh, my phone's acting up here.
Oh, hanky panky.
It's called Hanky Panky. Okay. So if you Google Kent Monkman, Hanky Panky, you will see one of his pieces of art, right? And what's going on here is pretty shocking.
Yeah.
And so what you're seeing, if you look at this, what you're seeing is where they are is they're in a traditional indigenous house. So this is kind of like in Eastern Canada. This is the sort of typical houses that indigenous people in Eastern Canada would have lived in traditionally, okay? And so here you can see we've got indigenous women all the way around, right, watching. And then on the left, kind of inside of that wooden structure, you can see those are Canada's kind of founding fathers, right? So John A. Macdonald is there, and a couple other, guys that helped to create Canada. And then on the right, you can see this is Kent Monkman's kind of character that shows up in all of his artwork. His mischief eagle testicle, which is meant to sound kind of like an indigenous name, but it's also supposed to be like mischief and egotistical at the same time. So he's kind of created this character that's sort of him, but also sort of not. And yeah, and here's Justin Trudeau, and there's about something sexual is about to happen to him, and I'm not going to go into it. But yeah, but Kent Monkman was kind of forced to, or not forced to, but he apologized for this.
Oh, this is the art you went us, right?
This is what?
The art where you said where you went astray, like where you took it too far.
Yeah.
This is the art.
This is the one that he took. He may have taken a little too far, but you know the job of art, right? The job of art is to get people talking, right? It's to get if you look at a piece of art, artists want you to say, "Wow, this makes me feel this," or "Wow, look at that thing," or "What do you think is going on here?" Right? And art is meant to make you talk, right? That's one of the purposes of art is to get people talking. And so Kent Monkman's art is all about that, right? He wants people to look at it and have a reaction and start talking about what they see. And so here, again, he agreed that he may have gone a little bit too far. But, you know, what he's doing in this image is what he often does, is that he turns it around, right? So often, Indigenous people are seen and defined by Western eyes, right? We're the ones who are doing the seeing, right? And we're kind of portraying Indigenous people as we think they are, right? And here he's turning it around, right? Remember when we looked at those images at the beginning of this Indigenous Canada thing, and remember we had like the white European military guys coming through the forest greeting the Indigenous people, and we said that, you know, in that image it seems like the Indigenous people have the power, right? They're bigger, they take up more of the image, their facial expressions were kind of, you know, a little confused but not really concerned. And then there was this little white guy who was like, "Hello, here I am," you know, sort of peeking out of the forest, right? And in this image here, you can see that Indigenous people have the power again, right? They're all gathered around, right? They're all watching this, and you know, they seem to be having a pretty good time, right? And you can see the founding fathers here are very uncomfortable, right? They're kind of, you know, they're powerless, right? They don't have power. And so Kent Monkman's kind of flipping it around here, right? He's saying, and he says it in the film yesterday, he says, you know, well, you know, you look at Indigenous people, but Indigenous people are looking back, right? And this is how we see you, right? And so, but here he was kind of forced to apologize, or people asked him to, or he chose to apologize, because he's kind of glorifying sexual assault in this image, right? And because of the fact that Indigenous women are far more likely to suffer sexual assault or sexual violence than non-Indigenous women, some people felt, you know, here you have a bunch of Indigenous women watching a sexual assault and laughing at it, while meanwhile they are much more likely to be sexually assaulted. So it was kind of like, you know, people were uncomfortable with that, and so he did apologize for this piece and said, yeah, he kind of, that wasn't his intention, but he maybe overstepped a little bit, right? But it is, you know, this picture is very kind of in line with some of his other artwork, right? Where he's trying to, you know, flip it around, right? And give Indigenous people power through his artwork. Right? Okay, I think that catches us. Up. Did we watch 20 Minutes yesterday? 20 and a few seconds?
36.
And 36 seconds? Good memory.
Mm,
All right.
thank you.
All right. So, what we'll do, yeah, so let's watch the rest of that documentary. So, online people, the link is in Microsoft Teams. We watched about 20 minutes yesterday, so start at 20 minutes and go from there. Watch until the end, and then I'll see you back here and we'll talk about maybe some of these last two questions, okay? Yeah, so we'll see you in just a little bit. Okay. So, how are we doing? Interesting? Yeah, worth watching. Yeah, right. And yeah, it's too bad we don't have time to watch more of them, but it's nice to see because again, you know, we sometimes in education, I think we pay a lot of attention to the bad stuff, right? We pay a lot of attention to residential schools, which we should. We 100% should, but you know, it's also important to check in with people and see like what's going on right now, right? What are people's lives like? What are they struggling with? What's their experience, right? How we met. Oh shoot, what's his name now? The guy who was trapped on downtown East Side. Herb Varley's dad was Dixon. Dixon Varley. Oh, Herb Dixon. That's what his name was. Herb Dixon, right? So yeah, we saw Herb, and so he's. How do you think he kind of got stuck in the downtown East Side? Addiction, yeah, right. So I think his son mentions he had a crack cocaine addiction, which sounds pretty serious to me, right? What other things are kind of keeping him there? Unemployment, right? Yeah, like he's living just in that small room, right? Which I imagine is all he can afford, right? Yeah, so unemployment. What do you think is keeping him out of a job?
His drug addiction.
Could be, right? People with addictions tend not to make very good employees, right? They sometimes come to work drunk or high, or they miss work because they're hungover or whatever, right? So they tend, you know, if you don't have a tight control of your addiction, which most people don't, you wind up fired, right?
Also, he was unable to find any jobs.
Yeah,
No one was hiring him.
yeah, he couldn't find any jobs, right? And I'm gonna do a little bit of guessing here, but I imagine he doesn't have much in the way of education either. I'm kind of imagining that he probably left high school early, like many young Aboriginal people do, and then he went off on a fishing boat, right? And now, how old would you say he is?
Um,
50.
Some years old, so
Okay. Okay, let's give him let's say he's 50, sure. So, yeah, he's a 50-year-old man with not even a high school education, right? So, he's got a big problem, right? Because, you know, if you don't have a high school education, it's going to be very difficult for you to find a job, right? Unless you're still in high school, and then it's okay. But once you're old enough to be out of high school without that, you're going to struggle, right? And so, you know, Herb worked on fishing boats for years, and he's come back, and you know, he probably faces some racism and discrimination, but also he doesn't really have an education to speak of, right? And so he kind of has no skills that society wants, right? And so he's stuck without a job. He's stuck in a really rough part of town. You know, he's going to struggle with his drug or alcohol addictions, and yeah, it's tough to get out, right? When you don't have money, don't have education, and you have a substance abuse problem that will, you know, keep you from being a good employee, right? So yeah, he's going to have a tough time, right? And you can kind of see that you can kind of see an interesting dynamic where his son Herb and I think his sister Leslie, right? Or yeah, I think Leslie's Herb's sister. You know, they're kind of like, well, there's nothing we can do, right? Because so you get the sense that, you know, when they've tried to help him, it hasn't been successful, right? His addictions have kind of gotten in the way, and he's kind of slid back to where he was, right? And so, and that, unfortunately, that's sometimes what happens, right? Is that people get stuck in addiction and you can't rescue them, right? Like there's nothing you can do to kind of pull them out of it because they'll slide back in. And so it is kind of sad, but you can get that sense that they've tried to help him in the past, but they haven't been able to, right? He's slid back to the same spot, right? And sadly, he's not alone, right? There's lots of people who are struggling, stuck in that part of town, and maybe even are worse off than Herb is, right? Okay, so finally, last question for you. So this is a living culture, right? These people aren't, these aren't historical, artifacts. These people don't live in a museum. They are existing, right? They are a living culture. And so what how are they attempting to reclaim their culture? In what ways are they trying to sort of move forward?
They try not to get to the rest also to they try to stay.
They're trying to
They try to
educate
stay
their
as one.
children.
They try to stay as one? Or I guess they're trying to sort of like practice their traditions again, right? Or to continue to teach them, right, to their kids, maybe?
To children.
Yeah, right. So they're making sure that those cultural teachings get passed on, right? And we saw a little bit with the guys from Winnipeg's Most there talking to the elders, right? Audrey Bone and Stella Blackbird. They were passing on some knowledge and some wisdom, right? And Nakuset's doing the same thing with her kids, right? She's teaching them their traditions, right? Their beliefs, their values, their way of life, right?
Giving them names.
And giving them
so
in
they continue.
yeah, and that's and you can see that, right? Because Nakuset here was part of what they call the 60s scoop. And what was happening was that the government child welfare was seeing problems with indigenous families, not only indigenous families but lots of them, and so they would rescue kids from homes where there was addiction or violence or whatever, but then they would often place them not in an indigenous community but with white parents, right? And so that happened probably to Nakuset. Her parents were struggling and they couldn't parent her, they couldn't care for her for whatever reason, and so she was taken by the government, and then she was adopted to a family, but a white family, right? And you can see that she was encouraged to kind of hide who she was, right? To say that she was Israeli or whatever, and but you can see her reaction to that with her kids. She's like, no, I'm not. They're not going to be confused like I was, right? They're going to know who they are. Well, what else are we seeing? Other ways in which culture is kind of moving forward here.
Schools, now parents is like a school where they all take their kids there, both indigenous and non-indigenous, for the kids to learn about each other.
Yeah, a daycare, right? It's a daycare where, it's kind of run in an indigenous way. It's run by indigenous people, but there's a mix, right, of indigenous and non-indigenous people. And we said that was important, right? One of the things when we first started reading about prejudice and discrimination, one of the ways that you decrease prejudice is that you get people cooperating together, right? You mix them together and get them, working on the same level, right? And this is a perfect time to do it when kids are young, right? To sort of put them together in a setting that is, sensitive to Aboriginal culture, and you teach them that way. Right? What else is happening?
They were asking that the indigenous people with their culture they can be allowed to express it, so that they can learn culture, clothes and dancing around, and then the rest won't watch.
Yeah, we have to kind of make space for indigenous culture, right? And I think to some degree we've done that here in Vancouver, right? Because we we like to use indigenous artwork and we like to stick totem poles all over the place, but it's more than that, right? We can't just sort of take their culture and use it as cool design, right? We have to actually make space for these people and their beliefs and their practices, right? These are important things. Um, Anything else? What else is happening? I guess you could say education is happening, right? We met Ron Linklater there. He teaches at Red River College, and he offers a course in Indigenous or Aboriginal culture, right? So you can actually take classes at university where people will teach you about Indigenous culture, right? What the beliefs and values are and how the culture works, right? And lots of colleges now are actually creating courses with an indigenous purpose, right? So when I did my Bachelor of Education a number of years ago, I had to take an indigenous education class, mandatory. Had to take it. What else? Anything else? Any other kind of comments or things that you thought were interesting or cool or unexpected or surprising or not surprising or no? Everything was as expected? Interesting. Did you I think when we first started talking about Indian residential schools and I asked people, had you heard of them before? A lot of people put their hand up, right? So we've done a good job of kind of putting the word out and starting to talk about these things. But had you actually ever heard from Aboriginal people or from Indigenous people? Like, had you ever heard them speak about anything? Yeah. Which is weird, right? Because this is an issue that, is centered on Indigenous people in Canada, and yet we hadn't heard anything from them, right? And so, again, this is why it's important to. It'd be nice to have someone come in and talk to the class, but sometimes people are hard to, especially during COVID. But people are hard to sort of arrange. But, um, but yeah, it's we have to make sure that we're making space for their voices, right? And so, now that everyone is talking about Indian residential schools and Indigenous people in Canada, it's important that we make sure that we're actually hearing from Indigenous people, right? Not just white people talking about Indigenous people. And so, because, yeah, as you can see, they're very capable of speaking for themselves. Okay, want to take a little break? Break? Okay, let's take a break, and then we'll come back. Okay, and we are back. So, after watching this documentary, of course, whoops, there he is. You know, we should probably remember that, of course, this is still a difficult relationship, right? And it's one that's going to take quite some time to heal, but also we still have ongoing issues, right? And so, again, the trauma that residential schools and other government programs inflicted, that trauma is still present, right? And so, we can still see that Indigenous people are suffering prejudice and discrimination in society. Lots of communities are struggling with their living conditions, with their ability to earn income. They're struggling with drug and alcohol addictions. There's a lot of things that, that Indigenous communities need support on, right? And again, Canadians kind of need to, wake up to this issue. And again, I think little by little we are. And of course, the discovery of those unmarked graves outside of Indian residential schools kind of help to do that, right? They help to identify to non-Indigenous Canadians that, something pretty significant and traumatic happened here. And even though, it doesn't affect most of our lives in a direct way, we need to fix this, right? And I would say that, all Canadians do, whether you're a citizen or whether you've just arrived a couple months ago or even a couple of weeks ago. Unfortunately, this is now your problem too. Sorry, but you've been here 2 weeks and now you have a problem, right? But this is everyone who lives in Canada. This is their issue to help solve, right, and to be aware of. And so, yeah, again, we have, we did a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We had 94 calls to action, right? 94 things that could be done to help kind of remedy the relationship between Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people. And we haven't really done much, right? There was a national inquiry into murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. And, nothing has really happened with that either. We still have the Indian Act, right? The Indian Act is still in force in Canada. And again, lots of the obviously racist stuff has been pulled out of it, and so it's not there anymore. But still, we have a piece of legislation in Canada that only applies to one racial or ethnic group in Canada. And we don't really want that, right? We don't want a situation where different races or ethnicities have different laws, right? That's what race-based societies do, and I don't think that's who we are or who we want to be, right? Yeah, we still have lots of negative stereotypes around Indigenous people. And again, if you drive through the downtown east side, you will see some of those stereotypes confirmed, right? You will see Indigenous people who are struggling with drug and alcohol addiction, who are unemployed and just kind of hanging around. I mean, you will see that, right? But there's also a reason for that, right? And it's not simply because, certain ethnicities or races are lazy, right? There's a history here. And so again, it's going to be a difficult journey forward, and nobody really knows what it's going to look like, right? What does it look like when we've repaired this relationship, right? What does it look like when, Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people are living in Canada in harmony, right? I don't know what that looks like yet. And so, but like Edith Cloutier said at the end of the video, she said, you need a dialogue, right? And you need to build it, right? One person says something, then the other one replies, and then back and forth, right? You create a conversation, right? You create a dialogue. And so far, I would say I'm not sure that that's really happening in a meaningful way. I mean, non-Indigenous people are saying things and Indigenous people are saying things, but I'm not sure that we have a conversation going yet, right? And so it remains to be seen how that will turn out. I think we're headed in the right direction, though. I think we've we're talking about these things a lot more than we would have 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago, right? We're having more conversations, and so that's good, but eventually those conversations have to result in action, right? And we haven't seen a lot of meaningful action, unfortunately. So stay tuned, I guess. Yeah. Alrighty, Roo. So there's another thing I'd like to do, but we do not have time to do it. I would like to hand back your quizzes from, was it the beginning of this week? Or was it last week? It was last Friday, wasn't it? Hand back your quizzes. I want to review them quickly, and then I want to send you out the door, okay? So, online people, just hold tight for a second. Okay, so those are rows. History. That's history 2. Okay, here we go. Here we go. Chang is here. Cole was here. Here. Lika is here. Ryan is here. Yo-Yo is here. Boom. Victoria. Jen. Faye. Andre is here. Hang on, I had this one last time. One here. Brian, I got this one last time too. Daniel was here. History. Jesse. Okay. I think that's all I have. Okay. So let's. What's that?
I took the quiz online.
Yes, you did. So I have nothing to give back to you. But hang on a second here. Okay. So let's go through this, okay? So let's make it a little bigger. So I said, in The Ugly Face of Disability Hate Crimes, Adam Pearson explained that someone convicted of assaulting a disabled person will spend less time in prison than someone convicted of assaulting a person belonging to a racial or religious minority. Why is that? Why do people who commit disability hate crimes, why do they get lighter sentences? There's probably a good 4 things that you could say for this. Or maybe everybody in the room struggled with that one. So remember, Adam said that one of the problems is that police don't often ask about people's disabilities, right? They're kind of embarrassed to, or they're kind of socialized not to pay attention to it, and so they don't ask. But it can be an aggravating factor in the crime, right? And so police need training, right? They need to ask about people's disabilities, even though they might be uncomfortable doing it, right? The second thing we said is that Crown prosecutors, so the lawyer for the government, often doesn't charge people with hate crimes, right? And one of the reasons is that, well, police don't identify them, right? Police don't say this person has a disability and it was a factor in this crime. But often prosecutors won't add that in because they think it's more. Actually, I was reading about this. This is actually, I did not expect you to write this on the quiz, but I was actually reading about this earlier this week. And they said often prosecutors won't charge people with hate crimes because it's more difficult to convict, okay? So if Zartaj attacks me with a baseball bat, right, and he hits me over the head a few times, but I survive and I call the cops and I say, Zartaj attacked me with a baseball bat, the police can pick him up, right, and they can charge him with assault, right? And let's say there's a witness. Let's say Malika saw it happen. So now Zartaj is in cuffs. The police have him. We have a witness, and they're going to charge Zartaj with assault. But if it's a hate crime means that Zartaj assaulted me because I'm white. Okay? Now, is it going to be easy to prove that Zartaj attacked me with a baseball bat? What's that? No, we have a witness. Malika saw it. She's going to testify. She's going to sing like a canary. Well, let's say, so the police have the bat, right? Let's say they find the bat at your house. I'm all bruised up, and they have a witness, right? Malika says, I saw the whole thing. Zartaj attacked Mike with a baseball bat, right? That's pretty easy to prove. But how do we prove that Zartaj attacked me because I'm white?
We may check in if you are actually raped.
Yeah, maybe, right? But it's harder to prove. It's harder to prove intent, right? It's harder to prove why Zartaj did it. We can prove that he did it, right? We have the evidence. We have a witness. You saw Zartaj hit me with a baseball bat. But as to why he did it, that's more difficult, right? So the prosecutor will often try to find the thing that's easiest to convict, right? And so it's easy to convict Zartaj of assault. A hate crime, tougher to prove, right? And they don't want to risk the judge or the jury saying, no, you haven't convinced me that it's a hate crime, so not guilty, right? Prosecutor doesn't want that. So the prosecutor goes for the easiest thing. I can prove that he assaulted Mike. That's what I'm going to charge him with, and then we'll get him convicted. So that didn't come up in the Adam Pearson documentary, but it was something I was reading about earlier, and it applies to all hate crimes. Sometimes it's harder to tell, it's harder to prove why people did it, but you can prove that they did. So often they just get charged with what they did rather than what they intended to do, because that's more difficult to prove. Anyway, so prosecutors often do not charge people with hate crimes, and then judges can't sentence people to hate crimes, right? The judge can't punish you for something you're not charged with, right? If you're charged with assault, the judge cannot convict you for murder, right? I'm still alive. The other thing that you might have said here was that there are different minimum sentencing requirements, right? So we said that people who are convicted of a disability hate crime often get less time in prison than people who aren't, right? And so, or then who are accused of a hate crime against a religious or a racial group, right? And so you could have said that as well. That would have worked for me. Sexual orientation and sexual identity. What are those things? What's sexual orientation? A lot of people struggled with this one. So, sexual orientation is who you desire as a sexual partner, and not specifically who, but the gender you desire, right? And so if you desire the same gender as you, then you are hetero or homosexual. If you desire a different gender, then you are heterosexual, right? And of course there's bisexual and pansexual and all sorts of things. But sexual orientation describes who you are attracted to, right? Who do you want to have sex with? Sexual identity is different though, right? Because that's how you present yourself to society, right? And that has a lot to do with what you're allowed to do and what it's safe to do, right? So there are lots of gay people living all around the world, but their sexual identity is straight, right? Because they either live in a country where homosexuality is illegal, or it's just dangerous, or maybe they're just not comfortable, right? Maybe they feel their friends will reject them or their family will reject them. And so, they present themselves to society as a straight person, right? But that's not their sexual orientation. That's not really who they are, right? So there's a difference between orientation and identity. Orientation is kind of who you are attracted to, who you desire. Identity is how you present yourself to the world, right? How you identify yourself. We said these two cigarettes are marketed to men and women. Sometimes women smoke men's cigarettes, but not the other way around. Why not?
Because one thinks they're more powerful. It's a bit shameful for them to smoke women's cigarettes, as they think they're superior to men.
Yeah, right. So men don't want to be seen smoking women's cigarettes, right? Men want to feel, strong and powerful, and to smoke, a woman's cigarette would be shameful, right? Their guy friends would laugh at them. Hey, nice girls' cigarettes,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's what you would hear, right? That's what you would hear. Can I get your purse for you? Yeah, that you would hear guys making those kind of comments, right? And so, but why doesn't it work the other way? If, okay. So because men are the dominant group and women are the minoritized group, right? And so when women when any minoritized group borrows from the dominant group, they kind of get a little bump up, right? Like it's cooler. So it's much cooler for a woman to smoke a man's cigarette, right? Because she looks tough and badass, right? But it doesn't work the same way with men, right? If they use a woman's product, think about movies. If they use a woman's product, it's meant to be funny, right? How many times have you seen, like a guy in a movie, and he comes out of the shower and he's wearing like a pink shower cap on his head, and that's supposed to be funny, right? And it is funny, but it doesn't work that way for the other way, right? Women who borrow from the world of men, it's often framed as cool, right? She's tough, she's a badass, right? When guys do the same thing, it's framed as humorous, right? Because it's ridiculous and shameful that he would use a female product, right? So again, it shows us who's the dominant group and who is the minoritized group, right? Who has power and who doesn't.
Also, it shows the norms of the society.
Right.
They are used to seeing men being men, not never trying to take women's place.
Okay. Yeah, and it does tell us a little bit about what, I guess the ads themselves tell us what society expects of men, right? And the two ads that we saw on the screen, one was kind of showing us men as like rugged individuals, right? Out there where a man belongs, right? Smoking his cigarette. And yet the woman, she was very sophisticated, very pretty, all dressed up with diamonds, looking like she was, going out for the evening. And so, yeah, it tells us a little something about what society expects of men and women, right? Or how society thinks that men and women are. With the Big Bang Theory, they managed to get away with a lot of misogyny and sexism. How did they manage to do that? Why do people laugh instead of...
It was like made in such a way that made people laugh.
Right. So
It was like a joke.
definitely, right? So the show it's a funny show, right? It's a sitcom. It's a situation comedy, right? It's not a drama. So it's meant to be funny, but sexism is not always funny, right? Misogyny is not always funny. So how did they manage to make it funny, or how did they manage to kind of get away with it?
Parents are not really considered to be that appealing or that straight to girls.
Yeah.
So when they do such things, it's like they don't mean that. They don't mean it that way.
Right.
If it was a straight guy or some normal guy, probably he would have been clear and way more clear than I'm not hurting at all. That wasn't what I meant.
Yeah. So the nerds kind of are allowed to get away with it because they're seen as harmless, right? They're seen as, they what can they do, right? They're not good with women. They're not confident, right? And so when they say, they're going to go out and, pick up a bunch of women, everyone rolls their eyes and they're like, yeah, whatever, right? They're going to go to the comic book store, right? Like a bunch of nerds. So they're allowed to get away with it because they're framed as harmless, right? Whereas, a more kind of masculine or macho character saying those same lines would come off entirely different, right? They would come off threatening and kind of, ugh, right? Any other reason they're allowed to get away with it, or they're able to get away with it? So they frame them as nice guys. They frame them as nerds who are harmless.
The background, the audience like it immediately tells you where to react to
Okay.
the comedy. So
Yeah.
it's like your brain is being told what to do. So it's like really hard to realize that unless you watch the movie with the context of
Oh,
realize.
like when you hear other people laughing?
Yeah, the audience.
Yeah.
It's just like you're being told what to do.
Yeah. Oftentimes we react the way other people react, right? And so in person and even on TV. And so the laughs are there to kind of tell you what's funny, right? Even on a subconscious level, they're encouraging you to laugh, right? The last one, I'll just do this quick because we're out of time here, because lamp shading, right? So the idea of the writers pointing out that they know something is, they know what they're doing. They know that they're using a cliche. They know that they're doing something racist or sexist. So don't get upset. We know, we get it, right? And so, again, the Big Bang Theory did it a couple times by saying, that's racist, and then they kind of have a chuckle and then they move on, right? So they get to get away with it by saying, don't worry, audience, we know what we're doing, right? And again, Deadpool's really good at that too, right? He often looks at the camera and he's like, well, that's just lazy writing, right? And so he's lamp shading as well, right? He's telling the audience that he knows that, he knows that it's not the greatest, but the writers get it, right? Okay, last one. How do we tell the difference between sexual exploitation and empowerment? Remember, we were talking about the idea that it has to do with consent, right, and choice. So if a female performer is able to get up on stage and be really sexy, and if she's able to freely make the decision that, no, I don't actually want to do that, then it's not exploitation, right? Then it's empowerment. If she is able to freely choose what she wants to do, fantastic, right? But if she's not free to choose, if she feels she has to be overly sexual because she won't be successful if she's not, or her fans demand it, or her agent or her record company demands it, well, that's not expression anymore. That's not empowerment. That is exploitation, right? She's being made to be sexual in order to make everybody money, and that's different, right? So consent is the important thing here. Can these female performers do what they want? And more specifically, can they say no, right? Can they freely say, you know what, I don't want to dress in this tiny thing and go prancing around the stage. I just want to dress a little more, conservatively. If they're allowed to do that freely, then we have sexual empowerment, right? They can be as sexy as they want or not as sexy as they want of their own free will. If they're not allowed to make that free choice, then that's different, right? We have sexual exploitation, okay? So consent here is the freedom, the ability to say no without consequence, right? That's what it is. So, and you could extend that to sexual activity too. Consent is a yes, but it's also the ability to say no without anything bad happening, right? Okay, that is all the time we have. Thank you for coming today. I will see you on Monday. Have a nice weekend. Yes, that's it. See you Monday.